things, and healing cripples, raising from the dead. Now I understand your God. Huh? Means? That's what you said. Oh, from the Christ of your this Jesus. I agree. To the
Ask that question during class. That's a good question. Yeah, please. So I can address it for everybody.
Oh, it's here.
She is.
So long. Then I'm sure that you can rock if you try.
No,
So if you are the Christ, yes, the great Jesus Christ, prove to me that you're no fool. Cross my swimming pool, do that for me, and I'll let you go free. Come on, King of the Jews.
Don't see it, no? Walker! Is Miss Walker here? I see something, Matt. Is she here, or is that stuff? That's your stuff. Okay. Thank you, Miss Cottrell. Bella? This is one. There's something a captive fan. To be shown that you are just any man.
Jesus Christ. Something wrong. Jesus, why do you take so long? King of the Jews. Hey, aren't you me, Christ? Mr. Christ, you're a joke. I'm nothing but a fraud. Take he's got to say, you king of the you king of the Jews. Get out of here. You. Get out of here, you. Get out.
Yes. Does anyone know which movies that's from? No. Jesus Christ Superstar. Andrew Lloyd Webber. Yeah, she's back. And she's here. I always think you were here. Just didn't notice. Oh, because you had your cup here. I noticed the cup. I didn't know. It's Jasmine. Excuse me, not Miss Jasmine. Nice. Why? Jump. So I'm thinking this magic. Must be a Thursday. Good to see you all again. But just taking my mom down. I got you, sir. So this lady, please ask your question because I think it's a good question. Hello, sir. What's that?
Keys Library Reserve? Can we find them online as well on the Keys Library website? Or-
Yes. If you, it's a little bit of a journey, but if you go on the website for Keys Library and you go up into Keys Cat, you have to specifically go into Keys Cat, the drop-down box, there's World Cat, there's Keys Cat. You go in there and then there's a link up at the top. You have to kind of look for it that says like reserve shelf. You can search, the professor, search the course for the reserve shelf. Okay. But I mean, if you just walk into the library and go to the reserve shelf, they're all there. I mean, they shouldn't be taken out, right? Okay, so I mean, at least you know what's there, right? Yeah. Okay, but they should be there. You're not allowed to take out reserve books. You have to return them. So yeah, they should be there on the reserve shelf. If you want to see what specifically is on the reserve shelf, then yeah, that's how you would do it. Is anything else going on this week that I should mention? Anything important? Notable for the course, Ms. Cottrell? Anything? Ms. Robbins? Mr. Tedeschi?
The rapture.
The rapture? Did you say the rapture, sir?
What is that?
Well, if the rapture happens, sir, I'm assuming you're talking about the second coming of Christ. We won't know it won't be known to us because Jesus didn't reveal when he would be coming back. Yes, Mr.
Some people said it would be 23rd, but it's supposed to happen.
It was?
Some people said that, but
Well, I would say, Mr. Kinkle, that if you are a Roman Catholic, you need not worry about it. And I'm a Catholic, so I'm not going anywhere. I've already.
I never did that. It was like sad.
The end of the world.
Well, why would Jesus rapture?
Combined the
Items,
Well,
only these clippers.
She bought.
Yeah, it was the clipper to be a rapture was coming, so they needed someone to take their kid. I said, oh my God.
that's insane. Have you been to a Taylor Swift concert? Have you seen the people at a Beyonce concert? That's
I
insanity.
personally don't know.
Harry Styles shows up and got all these people outside his apartment building weeping, crying. That's insanity, Mr. Hinkle. Religion can't beat that kind of insanity.
No, I mean the people putting their kids up for CPS.
What's CPS?
Child Protective Services.
Oh, okay. Anywho, no, Mr. Tedeschi, that's very good, Mr. Tedeschi, for bringing that up. But no, I'm looking for something more directly relevant to the course, Ms. Wanamaker. Is anything important still going on, or the quiz? Yes, what's going on with the quiz? Huh? What's going on with the quiz? Is anything going on, Ms. Peralty? No.
Tomorrow night.
Do tomorrow, that's all.
It's due tomorrow, right? It's been going on all week. Hopefully you've been, done it. And it's due tomorrow. So get it done, please. Otherwise it will be late. It will still be open. The answers will be released. Ms. One, in case you're wondering, the answers are released on Wednesday morning, 12 a.m., as soon as it turns over to Wednesday. So you only really have until Tuesday to get it done after the answers are out. Nothing I can do. I'm not going to let you take a quiz where the answers are already available. So get it done, even if it's late. Yes. Okay. Hispanic. Huh? I don't know.
It's just me.
No, I agree with you. Well, I've been sweating for the last couple of weeks.
I think it's hot.
I like
It's been a minute.
Imagine when Jesus was preaching the Sermon on the Mount. You don't think people weren't talking to each other? What did he say? Anyways, Hispanic Heritage Month, yes. And I think still Tuesday we have Hispanic Heritage Month, right? Anyways. But today I'm going to talk about these people, the servants of God, the Franciscan martyrs of Georgia. The Franciscan martyrs of Georgia. Franciscans, like Junipero Serra was a Franciscan. Hence they're wearing the habit, the uniform, I guess you could say, the outfit of the Franciscan friars. And they're just servants of God, so they've just opened their cause for sainthood. And these were a bunch of gentlemen who were serving the missions in coastal Georgia in 1597, around the end of the 1500s, the 1590s. They were working amongst the local native population, the Guale Indians. Don't know if they're still there anymore, or if we've moved them, or displaced them in some way. Yes. Anyways, these friars came over and were preaching the gospel. They learned the local indigenous language, the Guale language, and they were living peacefully with the natives. They were just living amongst them, talking about their religion as they saw fit. And most of the Guale natives actually did embrace Christianity. There was no military presence, so it wasn't like they forced it on them by force of arms. It was just through their own convincing. People liked the message and decided to give up their previous beliefs for Christian beliefs. So there was no military presence. And, let's see here. The Spanish were, they were there because of the Spanish. A lot of the southern United States were actually first colonized by Spaniards. The Georgias, Florida, Texas. I guess they were in Louisiana too, although the French eventually dominated there. But in the region of Georgia and Florida, it was the Spanish explorers. So they were all Spanish. They weren't Americans. But again, Georgia eventually became a state of one of the 13 original colonies that became the United States. So they died within what became the United States. So just like with Junipero Serra, I'll say close enough. I'll accept them. I accept them as Americans. Let's see. They did run into some trouble with a local chief, because of their beliefs, not because they were foreigners or anything, but I think the chief wanted to have another wife, an extra wife, polygamy and stuff like that, which is not necessarily an uncommon phenomenon in a lot of cultures, of men having several wives, and even in some cultures of women having several husbands. But not according to Christian teaching. It's one man and one woman until death. One of them dies, then you can marry again. And even then, in the past in Christianity, that wasn't always acceptable. They didn't necessarily let people remarry even after the one person died. But nevertheless, it's very clear. So the Franciscan friars had to preach this message and say, look, you can't take another wife if you're going to be a Christian. You can't do this practice anymore. That's part of your culture. Remember, Jesus is definitive, definio. He defines even the culture and the society. And so this practice, which was perfectly acceptable in Guale culture, was not now acceptable for the Franciscans. So this chief was going to have them killed. They're going to kill the friars because they opposed him on this matter. And so, he tried to send some of the Native Americans to do this, but they were unwilling to carry out his order. Maybe they were Christians, maybe not, whatever. But they liked the friars, and they tried to tell them, hey, leave town, get out of here, because, the chief was, I think I have is it Juanillo? Yeah, his name was Juanillo, which obviously is, a Spanish extraction. I don't know what his original Guale name was, but it was called Juanillo. Juanillo wants to kill you. But they wouldn't leave. They wouldn't leave. They didn't believe the rumors. Well, Mr. Hinkle, what's the old saying? I can't remember. Anyways, so Juanillo and his men reached them and killed the 2 friars where they were in their mission in that part on the coast of Georgia. And they also went and continued on and killed a number of other friars. Hence we have, 2 friars and then 3 other friars were killed. One other friar they kidnapped and tortured, which the Native Americans seem to like to do a lot, because a lot of missionaries here were tortured. He didn't die, though, so he was a confessor, I guess. You call him a confessor, not a martyr. He didn't die for the faith. He was released. He was liberated months later. Anyway, so this happened. So I guess, the diocese is in that neck of the woods, Savannah, I think, has opened the cause for these men as martyrs dying for their faith because they defended Christian teaching on marriage against, the society of the time, and they were killed for it. So I asked so they're at the start of the journey, they're they're servants of God. So I asked the servants of God, the martyrs of Georgia. I don't know all their names. Miguel de Añón, Antonio de Badajoz, Blas de Rodriguez, and Francisco de Verascola. And hopefully I'm not missing somebody, but nevertheless, I ask for your prayers, gentlemen, and for all of us in this class, and for the people of Georgia, because there might be another hurricane that's coming their way, Georgia and the Carolinas, that people will be safe and sound. Amen. What is writing? Okay, Jesus. Back to Jesus. All right, I was showing a different PowerPoint last time, and I'll have to check Canvas to see if I need to correct the PowerPoint for this section of the course. So I could have thought that, remember when I got to the Pontius Pilate inscription? I knew that I had put the translation on the PowerPoint. And I put the PowerPoint on a USB stick here, and I uploaded it, but it's a different PowerPoint for some reason. But I tracked down the one I wanted, and I've uploaded it. So I've made the correction. So if it is different from the one that I put on Canvas, that's fine. I'll just change it, but just go along with it for today, please. Okay, here we go. Yeah, this is a better picture than I had. The other one was blurry and... Yeah, Dis Augustis Tiberium Pontius Pilatus Praefectus Judaeae Feci Dedicavit. Well, we only have one letter there, but given that inscriptions like these were usually written in a very formalized style, archaeologists can tell what almost certainly this line said. He made and dedicated it, for Tiberius. Okay? This is an interesting little detail because up in the Gospels just call Pilate a governor. They don't actually give his actual title. And even in the Roman historian Tacitus mentions Pilate a little bit, and he calls him a procurator, which was a different type of official. So for 2,000 years, people just assumed that this guy Tacitus's history was correct. But he wasn't. So this bit of archaeological data, I guess, or this datum of archaeology has corrected us that actually he was a prefect of Judea, not a procurator. What's the difference? Well, it just meant he had control not just over the military, but he had control over the taxes, gathering the taxes. I think a procurator just had control over the taxes or something like that. There was a minor distinction. It's not a major thing, but nevertheless, corrected historically our knowledge of this man, because as I said from the Gospels, he's just called a governor. There's no specific designation given to him. So Pontius Pilate, there's our historical evidence. I'll get back to that. Crucifixion. Back to crucifixion. That slide should be reversed. Jesus is brought before Pontius Pilate. He's deemed to be guilty of Well, a religious crime, it seems, by the Jewish authorities. Okay? We'll get to the question of why Jesus was killed in the first place. But he was brought before Pilate, and Pilate thought he was guilty of a crime. And never in the Gospel specifies what crime Pilate thought Jesus was guilty of, which is kind of weird. You'd think the Gospel writers, all four of them, would want to at least tell you why specifically Jesus was executed, right? Like Pilate decided to have Jesus executed, but they don't really. Okay, so we have to extrapolate. Nevertheless, something about Jesus rubbed Pilate the wrong way. He thought Jesus was guilty of a crime and deserving of death, and the form of death was crucifixion. Again, there's nothing unusual about this. This is perfectly in line with the historical record. For someone in Jesus' position, crucifixion was, a legitimate punishment for people who were not Roman citizens. It's very common, all right, not just in the life of Jesus. There's nothing unique about Jesus being crucified. It was considered a very horrific practice, and so as I said, it was not, you couldn't do it to a Roman citizen. For non-Romans, yes, which Jesus was, and it was not done to Roman citizens because it was considered so shameful a death. So you only reserved crucifixion for people who were considered outlaws or the lowest of the low. So that gives you, again, some indication of Jesus' social standing, at least how Pilate thought it was. Jesus was not a man of importance. He was either an outlaw or he was some kind of scum. So he would be crucified. As I said, you could not do this to a Roman citizen. That was one of the benefits of citizenship as a Roman, is that if you did get the death penalty, you would not experience the shame of crucifixion. You would have your head cut off, which was considered a more merciful death, quick. Crucifixion could last for days, dying on the cross. And you're exposed to the crowds. Who can mock you and see you and make fun of you. Whereas, cut your head off, you're just gone, get rid of you. So that was considered the more honorable way to go. I'm not saying that crucifixion never happened to Roman citizens, but the fact that it is mentioned every now and then, it's mentioned because it was such a horrific crime. You did this to a Roman citizen. You can't do this to a Roman citizen. That's why it's mentioned. Because it was not supposed to be done. It was such a humiliating death and shameful that you couldn't do this. And what was crucifixion? What is the definition? It's capital punishment. Okay, you're expecting the person who's crucified to die. It's not a form of torture where you're just inflicting pain, or not hitting them with a cane or something, or whipping them. No, you're expecting them to die. And you die. The method of death is by affixing you to a beam of wood that is then suspended from another beam, a stake of wood that has been placed in the ground. And so it makes a crux, a cross. A cross. Faccio, it makes a cross. Faccio, to make something or do something. Okay, so you have a stake that's in the ground. And that's how it would have been. Jesus would not have been carrying the whole cross, because the Romans crucified a lot of people, not just the Romans. But if it's a form of punishment, you have to be efficient about it. And the Romans were nothing if not efficient. So they didn't have people carry the whole structure of the cross to be crucified. All right, I know it makes for great theater on Good Friday at a Catholic parish when, you got some young teenage boy carrying the cross down the street outside the church. But no, the stakes actually, not even one stake, but the stakes would have been there already. Jesus would have carried the beam, okay, almost certainly. The person to be crucified would carry his own beam on his back. And, you'd lay him down, you'd tie him or nail him, this person, to the beam and then hoist them up on the stake. Okay? And then maybe bind the feet or nail the feet or whatever. The point of crucifixion, and if anyone, I think I asked you before, if you've seen The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's film, maybe during your youth group or confirmation class, or maybe you just went to the theater. Maybe they showed it at your church. Remember? And if you know if you've seen the film, it's pretty bloody. You know, by the time Jesus gets to the cross, to the crucifixion scene, I mean, he's just a mass of blood. I mean, he's all ripped open from the whipping. Remember in the scene, there's where one of how would you call it, of a whip, the cattails or whatever. One of the cattails of the whip kind of gets stuck in Jesus' side. Remember that? Kind of like rips open his side and exposes his ribs. Who survived? Who survives that anyway? Anyway, okay. So Jesus has like some of his ribs exposed and blood from head to toe and stuff. Okay, that wasn't how you died with crucifixion. Through blood loss. Okay, yes, the Romans might nail people to the cross, but if you tie someone to the cross, you get the same effect, because the manner of death is not from blood loss. The manner of death is from asphyxiation. Suffocation is one of it. You can't breathe anymore, okay? That's how you die. And that's why it takes so long. You know, cutting someone's head off, and all the blood spurts out, you know, not going to the brain, boom, you're dead. Quick, easy. But crucifixion, no, you know, you're hung up on this beam, hanging free fall, you know, with only your body weight pulling you down, you know, and you have to keep pushing up to breathe so that the diaphragm can fill with air. Well, I mean, after you're there for a few days, okay, or even a few hours, your muscles start to get exhausted, okay, and you can't do that anymore. It's harder and harder until finally you just kind of sink down and your muscles are so tired. It's like when you're in the gym and you're, you know, working on the guns, right, Mr. Columbo? And eventually, you know, you're telling your arm, flex that flex, and it ain't going nowhere, right? In fact, because you've exhausted the muscle. So eventually your body does reach a point where the diaphragm is a muscle, muscles in your legs and your arms, are so tired that you may want to pull yourself up again to breathe, but you can't. You can't take another breath of air, and you run out of oxygen and you suffocate. Asphyxiation. So it's not about the blood, although people like to make it about the blood, the big bloody Jesus on the cross, you know. Or he shed his blood for us. Maybe that sounds better for a preacher than, you know, Jesus suffocated for us. You know, maybe, I don't know, maybe it sounds better. It's a better selling point. But that's not what happens during crucifixion. Now, why, if the Romans did use nails, and of course a person would bleed if you hammered nails through his hands and his feet, why would they have used nails? The Gospels all agree that Jesus was not just hung on a cross, he was nailed to it as well. Which you didn't need to do. As I said, you could just tie a person to the cross. That tells you something, again, that gives you that little bit of information, tells you something about how the Romans perceived Jesus. He was not a normal criminal. He was not normal to them. They wanted to punish him more. Okay? And so they did other things to him, like they whipped him. They whipped him before they crucified him. Which they didn't have to do. And they nailed him to the cross, which they also didn't have to do. So it tells you something about the seriousness with which they viewed Jesus' crime, whatever it might have been. They wanted to inflict more pain on him. So crucifixion. That's how he was killed. Our only archaeological evidence of crucifixion, at least in Palestine, we know that the Romans did it from historical writings, but we really don't have a lot of, and they did it a lot. Surprisingly, we don't have a lot of archaeological evidence for it. And up until the 1960s, we had none for Palestine. Even though, again, we know that the Romans, not just the Romans, but, the Herods, which Herod was it? Herod Agrippa? Anyways, one of the Herods, one of the descendants of King Herod, crucified a whole bunch of people. The whole road to Jerusalem was lined with people crucified by him. I think it was Herod Agrippa. But the Romans, of course, crucified to punish criminals. But until 1968, in Israel, they found this bone box. It's called an ossuary. An ossuary, from the word for bone in Latin. A bone box, okay, we would say in English. But it's a container for bones, which was Jewish practice. That's how they usually buried. You buried the body, and then you come back months later after the body has rotted and decomposed. You collect the bones of the person and you put them usually in a box of stone or something. And you can tell from the way that the stone ossuary is made and how it's decorated about how important the person was. This doesn't have much of any decoration. So the poor guy whose bones were put in here apparently was not a very important person. But on the side, we would scratch on who it was, so you'd know whose bones were in the box. Well, at least you should, Could people have removed the bones and dumped other bones in there over the centuries? Yes, they could have, so nothing's 100%, people. But this guy was John. His name was John, the son of Hagkol. Yehochanan, son of Hagkol. So we know his name, and this is datable to the time of Jesus. So he was crucified sometime in the 1st century AD. And what was fascinating and surprising, Mr. Cummings, about Yehochanan, this guy John, whose bones they found, was that he died by crucifixion. So he committed some crime, apparently, and we only know he died from crucifixion because they found a nail in his ankle bone. Somehow, apparently, I guess the Romans had, when they put him up on the cross, or whoever put him up on the cross, they put his leg to the side of the beam, the stake, and nailed him in from the side. I don't know if, at least they did it on one of his legs. I don't know if they did on both of them. But anyway, so again, that tells you he was a serious criminal, I guess. But when they went to remove the body, apparently, I wasn't there, so we have to, of course, guess and imagine, they couldn't get the nail out of the bone. Apparently it was notched into the wood or something, so they had to leave the nail in the bone. The other nails are not present in the bone box. But this one is in the bone, that they left in the bone. So that's our first archaeological evidence, even for crucifixion generally, but also crucifixion in Palestine. Okay? That doesn't tell us necessarily that that's how the Romans crucified Jesus. It just gives us evidence that the practice was there. And yes, it's accurate that the Romans would sometimes nail people to the cross, apparently, just like Jesus is said to have been nailed. So that's not the gospel writers making it up to make, to embellish the story, Probably not. So this was a shameful, humiliating death. This was not a victory. This was not a victory. And this was humiliation. And so, for the enemies of Jesus, this was a kind of vindication, yes? He's convicted as a felon. He'll never be president now. You don't know the U.S. Constitution. Even felony doesn't keep you out of the highest position in the... So Jesus got crucified. Nothing will come of his movement now. God has administered his judgment on this blasphemer, this false prophet. So that's how his enemies kind of looked at it, And his followers weren't particularly hopeful. It's not like his followers were like, yeah, but we know he's going to come back in 3 days. No, they lost faith in him. They ran away. They went into hiding. Almost none of them came to the cross. It's like if you're on trial, your parents are going to show up, your friends are going to show up. They'll sit on your side of the courtroom and support you, won't they? Hopefully. If they don't think, they're like, no, he didn't do it, He's innocent, Your Honor. No, nobody shows up to the cross. They stay away, except for a few women who come. No one's at his burial, again, for these few women and some other people. None of the apostles is there, apparently. None of them. None of his 12 closest followers. They're all in hiding, or they go back to their jobs. They go back up to Galilee to be fishermen again. They weren't waiting at the tomb on Sunday. They weren't like, let's camp out until Sunday for Jesus to come out. They thought it was over, apparently. And you can see this, and this was a hard sell for Christianity. This was not their big selling point. They could go out to the world and say, yeah, did you hear about this guy Jesus? And good man, holy man, had all these nice teachings. But eventually the story wends its way to his ultimate end. So what happened? He was made into a god? He was divinized? Or, he disappeared into the supernatural? Or, no, he was hoisted up on a cross. What? No one could believe that. For a Jew, it was proof positive that Jesus was a false prophet. He was wrong. And you had the evidence right in front of you, the crucifixion. How do you Christians explain that? If Jesus was such a good man, why would God allow him to be punished like that? So Christians have to rethink some things. And if you're a non-Jew, a pagan, well, this is just nonsense. I mean, Jesus is supposedly this hero, this king savior, this Messiah, this Christ, even the Son of God, even God himself in the flesh. And he allows human beings to do this to him? Well, what kind of God is he? He's stupid. He's not victorious. He's not triumphant over his enemies. His enemies kill him. So you can see, for example, the crucifixion was a hard sell. And Christians couldn't deny it. They never deny it. I mean, they don't whitewash it. They don't try to say, Jesus, kind of, as I said, Jesus was glorified. He just kind of went up into heaven. Because we know that some Christians did try to do this in the early church, very early days. I'll mention this later when I talk about the canon of the Bible. There's apparently an early writing called the Gospel of Peter. I don't know who it was written by, but it has Peter, the Apostle Peter in it, so they call it the Gospel of Peter. It's just a fragment, but it's the passion narrative with the resurrection. And, basically Jesus they could not accept that Jesus was crucified, so Jesus wasn't crucified. Jesus was just divinized. He was glorified by God immediately. They thought they crucified him. The Romans did, but they didn't really. Because that could never happen to a great prophet of God or the Son of God. So there were Christians who couldn't accept that and tried to change the story. But the Gospels don't whitewash it. The church didn't whitewash it. You can't deny that this is an historical fact, which they could have, because there was no TikTok back then. There was no Fox News or anybody with cameras and iPhones and stuff like that. They could have just made it up and said, we'll say nothing about it. We'll never show the cross in our churches, which in the early churches they usually didn't. They didn't usually show the cross. So here, this seems to be our first and earliest image of the crucifixion of Jesus. Around 200 AD, it's called the Alexamenos graffito. Graffito is something that's scratched into a wall. Okay? If you have more than one scratching or etching, it's called graffiti. All right? But in the singular, it's a graffito. 200 AD, they were digging around Rome. I think it was in Rome, and they found some building, probably a slave house or a school for training slaves in the imperial court, educate them how to be good slaves to the emperor and stuff like that. And, it was used for different things, but they, in uncovering, uncovering the whole site, they came across this etching on the side of the wall, which is just very interesting. First of all, the language here is Greek, it's not Latin. And as I think I might have told you before, I'll tell you again, the common language in the ancient world was Greek, not Latin. That was the common language that people spoke. Hence, the Gospels were written in Greek, not in Aramaic or anything like that. And even the Romans, they did use Latin, but, when writing books and writing important documents, inscriptions and whatnot, they would prefer Greek. Greek had the popularity. So this is written in Greek by somebody. And it's called the Alexamenos Graffito because it's a man's name. It mentions this guy, Alexamenos. You can see it here. You don't have any Greek fraternities or sororities on campus, right? Yeah, so you don't have to learn the Greek alphabet. No one took Greek in school or high school. And Alex, this is the X side. Alex, Now this is one has moved. It's here somewhere. And this is the other epsilon. N O Omicron. The C is like an S in ancient Greek. Another E. So Menos. So actually I missed the other. Here it is. Here's Alexamenos. This is Sabete. This is a B or a beta, another epsilon, tau, epsilon. This is a theta, a TH sound, another eta, kind of an omicron here, and somewhere around, here's the new, kind of see it, okay. So, if we transliterate this alphabet into English, maybe you can make out some of it, but Alexamenos Sabetetheon. What does that mean? That's interesting. Glad you should ask, Mr. Cummings. I'll get to that in a moment. But you can see the picture here, right? A person seems to be hung on a cross, right? Crucified. But is it a person, Ms. Lacey? Is it a person? Why did you do that? You're not sure? Why not? Huh? You weren't alive. But you're alive now. Can't you see the picture? Huh? Well, I agree with that. Pictures might not always be accurate, but you can see it now, right? What does it look like? Okay, how does it look like a person? Arms and legs? Really?
Yeah, I think it does.
You think that's like an animal head?
Yes.
But it has a bikini.
Well, yeah, you don't really know. Why? Why don't you know if it's human or not? Of course, though.
There's a version of him.
Why not?
There's an animal.
We're not animals?
No.
I thought we were animals. Calling biology teachers. Anyone? Are we animals or not? Come on, I've seen people on spring break. I've seen the girls go on wild videos. That's a 90s reference.
I feel like I think we are animals, but we're not oceans. So you want to have a
Okay.
It's the same.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And Ms. Miller, Yeah, why would a human-like body have a horse's head on it? Something that we usually don't, I mean, you might have one at a Halloween party. It's not naturally. Why do you think so?
Just calling it a horse. Seems like, yeah, you're a horse, you know, like, it's not nice. You're not a horse.
He's saying what he's not, making fun,
Yeah,
maybe.
it's my guess.
Stick it.
It's so funny, Miss Peralty.
It's the topic on it.
It could seem like you're making fun. It does seem unusual though. I mean, it's not common. I mean, in some of the myths, like the Minotaur is half man, half bull, but he's a monster. You know, he's not seen as normal. He's something to be feared. People don't like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I again, right, you're right, Ms. Lacey, that, you know, you don't know because you weren't there then, nor was I when this person was scratching this into the rock, into the stone. So you don't know. I mean, you can't tell. It's art. Could be just someone making a picture, but it could be someone just making a funny picture. But it could be someone mocking something, an idea. What do we got here? We have a person here, yes? Looks like a real human person. No animal head. Looks like a man, I would presume. Yeah, I'm not there to ask him. Or her. So I'm assuming it's a human being with his arm raised like this. And he seems to be raising it towards this crucified figure. Huh? Oh, that's interesting. I didn't notice that before. Huh. What do you think he might have in his hand?
Is it?
I agree. I don't know. Just looks that way. Well, we do know something about Roman culture when, I mean, if this is what's going on, I mean, this symbol in Roman culture was how you said hello to somebody. You hailed them. Hail! You lifted your hand like that. Right? The Nazis did not invent that. It wasn't a bad symbol until then. Okay? We used to do it. Americans would do it. When would Americans give the old hail sign? And what were they giving it to? Huh? Huh?
High five.
A high five? No, they weren't high fiving people. They were giving a hail sign to something. Huh? Praying? No, not praying. Close in idea, though. Close to the idea. Something that you had to do for like 12 years of your life every morning in school.
Raise your hand.
Pledge of allegiance. Allegiance. Yes.
That's what they used to do.
I pledge allegiance to the flag. They changed it, of course, because of the Nazis and the fascists. Well, the Mussolini, the fascists of Italy were not Nazis, but they also did this as well. But yeah, they changed it. It was like this: I pledge allegiance to the flag. But then they changed it to like turn your hand like this, like you're more pointing towards the flag. And then eventually just got rid of it altogether, except put your hand on your heart, because it looked too much like what the fascists were doing over in Europe and the Nazis. So it became bad. But we used to do it. No negativity attached to it until certain negativity. And the ancient Romans did it all the time. So he seems to be saluting this person, hailing this person on the cross. This, well, I say person, but mixed person, animal and human, apparently. Now we come to the words. Yes, Ms. Minna.
You saw the total praising the person, right? And you said it was written in Greek.
It's written in Greek, yes.
I don't know when the whole Greek gods type of thing got phased out, but like maybe they're praying to a different god, if that's what it is.
Oh, you're saluting a god. Possible. Well, let's see, Ms. Minna. Let's see, because luckily, Ms. Lacey said, right, we're not there, we don't know, and we're not the artists, but Maybe if the artist wrote something on his work, Mr. Cummings, that might give us an indication. So, luckily he did. Alexamenos sabete theon. Alexamenos worships or honors God. Alexamenos is worshiping his God. This is Alexamenos hailing or worshiping his apparently donkey-headed God who was crucified. So, now, there are some scholars who try to argue that, well, this probably isn't a Christian symbol, or I should say an anti-Christian symbol, someone making fun of the Christian crucifixion or Christ's crucifixion. Could be something else, but, okay, fine. But when you have a PhD, you can always come up with other ideas. But, okay, but just give me the story of another God who was crucified. A God with a donkey's head who was crucified. Then I'll grant the person's point of view that it might not be Christ, but that's the only person I know in human history that has a religion around him, that there's a religion around him of a crucified man who's worshipped as God. So I assume that it's Christian. I think that's probably true. And it's funny that if it is, it's the first image we have, or the earliest image we have of the crucifixion of Jesus that's not by apparently a Christian, because it's making fun of him. It's making fun of. Here's this stupid guy worshiping his God, the crucified guy, and you indicate that you're making fun of him by sticking another animal's head on it, donkey or a horse or something. Silly. Did that already? Oh, I take this off and sweat. Why did Jesus die? Who killed Jesus? Historically. Well, obviously the Romans killed Jesus. Pontius Pilate was the Roman prefect, and he sentenced Jesus to death on the cross. It was Roman soldiers, probably, I'm assuming Roman soldiers, who took him to the place of execution and tied him and nailed him to the beam and stuff like that and hoisted him up to die. I think that point needs to be made, because you still find people on the internet or something who will say, well, the Jews killed Jesus and stuff like that. Well, that makes no sense. That's it makes as much sense as saying that Italians are to blame for the death of Jesus just because the Roman Empire started in Italy and Rome and stuff like that. You can't blame every Italian for the death of the Christ, even though it may have been, Pontius Pilate may have been an Italian when he sentenced Jesus to death. The Jewish leadership, they were certainly Jews, and they did not like Jesus, and most of them wanted him dead, but there were other Jewish leaders that actually did follow Jesus. Obviously, his immediate followers, the apostles, were all Jews, as far as we know. We would assume that many of his disciples outside that inner circle were also Jewish, because that's the group of people he seemed to be working with, okay? We have some stories of him meeting non-Jews and talking with non-Jews, but not a lot. Most of his interactions are in the synagogue with other Jews or with Jewish religious leaders and stuff like that. Not all of them were calling for the death of Jesus. Some of them did believe in him and followed him, were sad that he was crucified. So I don't think, you can just make that whole general blanketed statement of this whole group of people is to blame. But why would some people want him dead? Well, we don't know. We just don't know, Mr. Palumbo. The Gospels never explain it. They never try to tell us. It happened just like Jesus was baptized by John, but they don't necessarily come up with an explanation of why, because that did trouble people in the early church. Why would Jesus, who is the stronger one, be baptized by the lesser one? How could Jesus, who is the Messiah, the Christ, the King, die shamefully on the cross? Well, he was raised from the dead. Well, they didn't think so. Really, Christians didn't think so. Because if they thought Jesus was like going to be raised from, I mean, if you think like you got your cell phone and you get a little text or something saying, you know, oh yeah, Beyonce, 3 p.m. I forget, what stadium do the Eagles play in? MetLife? Huh?
Lincoln Financial.
Lincoln Financial. You know, Lincoln Financial. Be there. That's when it drops. You know, would you be surprised if there's not like a few thousand people there? You know, like, boss, I gotta go. I'm checking out right now. Back to done. I'll see you later. You know. Where are they? Where is anybody at the tomb? If they had a pre-existing belief, and Jesus had told them multiple times, I will be killed, but don't worry, I will be raised back to life a few days later. Okay, fine. So where the heck are these people? Why aren't they camped out in front of his tomb waiting? Because they lost faith in him, apparently. They weren't sure anymore because they couldn't deny the historical fact of what happened. And they had to ask the same question. Well, why did Jesus die? Why would God allow him to die? Well, so the Gospels present several reasons why Jesus was killed from the perspective of the Jews, the Jewish leaders of the Sanhedrin, the Great Council, the Sanhedrin, which actually is a Greek word, it's not Hebrew, or Aramaic, Sunhedrion, a seating together, so being seated together, like on a council, okay, or a commission. So they were a council of religious leaders, as I said, who made religious decisions for Jews, and they could hold trials of people and condemn them, and stuff like that. Or Sunhedrion, Sunhedrazo, to be seated. So a supreme council of Jewish religious and political leaders making decisions relevant to Jewish law and practice. And amongst the Jewish leaders, the Gospels indicate several reasons why Jesus was a problem. I mentioned some of these before. He was a violator of God's law. Okay, that certainly would concern the religious leaders who were very much into God's law and following God's law. Because that was an offense to God. You know, you weren't doing what God told you to do as a Jew. So that was an offense to God himself, the God of Israel. He claimed, this is interesting. Uh-oh. All right, thank you, sir. Just like Jesus. Except not like Jesus, because he didn't come back, did he? On the 23rd, remember? Yeah, so Jesus was blatantly doing that. Ooh, there's this interesting claim that Jesus said he would destroy the temple in Jerusalem and rebuild it. That was interesting. I mean, if I start sending out emails that, you know, I'm going to blow up some building in central Philly, who's there, please? Get down on the ground! I said get down! Show me your hands! You know, or at least, you know, they might put a bug or something into my computer, the NSA or somebody, put it on my email, just to, you know, see, is this guy a kook or is he serious? Like he's making plans to destroy a building or something. That's as outrageous now, it sounds as outrageous and troubling now, you know, as it did then. It was the same thing. Jesus is claiming to destroy the temple where the presence of God is amongst his people. So that made it even more serious. It's like, I'm going to blow up the White House, or I'm going to blow up the Congress or something. That was a very serious thing to do. That was an attack on God himself. The fact that Jesus said, well, I'll rebuild it, that's who cares? That he's going to do it. He can destroy even the temple. God's temple. It's kind of interesting if you think about it, because he doesn't say, you know what, I'm going to destroy the Romans who are occupying us and oppressing us. So they need to destroy the temple of God. Ooh, that's weird. Now that's interesting because this pops up every now and then. In the Gospel of Mark. Actually, if we go to Mark, let's open our Bibles and we'll go right to Mark. The Gospel of Mark, the first Gospel as far as we know. And go to the trial of Jesus and what's said. What is it? Mark chapter 14. Chapter 14. Beginning with, it says 57. Is that where I want to start? I'll start with 53. Chapter 14, let's start with verse 53. 53, who's got it? I would like to read it. Is Franco Zamora? No? Franco Zamora. Hello, Ms. Robbins. Go ahead, Ms. Jones.
Nope.
Ms. Cottrell. Sorry. Verse 53, please, yes.
Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and went right into the high priest's courtyard. There he sat with the guards, warming himself by the fire. Keep going.
Yep, keep going.
Inside, the leading priest and the entire high council were trying to find evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they couldn't find any. Many false witnesses spoke against him, but they contradicted each other. Finally, some men stood up and gave this false testimony. You heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days I will build another, made without human hands. But even then, they didn't get their story straight.
Yeah, keep going.
Then the high priest stood up before the others and asked Jesus, well, aren't you going to answer these charges? What do you have to say for yourself? But Jesus was silent and made no reply. Then the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? Jesus said, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothing to show his horror and said, why do you need evidence? We have all heard this blasphemy. What is your verdict? Guilty, to all cried. He deserves to die. Then some of them began to spit at him, and they blindfolded him and beat him with their fists. Prophecy to us, they jeered, and the guards slapped him as they took him.
Which translation is that?
The
Oh, the New Living Translation. Okay, so it's where it's a dynamic one. Not so formally equivalent. Rules. Well, we know that is very important thing after see. It's a looser translation, sir. Okay, so this is the account, our earliest account of Jesus' trial by a Christian in the Gospel of Mark. And what does it tell us? Well, Jesus is in front of the Sanhedrin, and Mark tells us this in verse 55. They kept trying to get testimony or witness against Jesus because they wanted to condemn him to death. Right? So they knew what they wanted to do, yes? It was a kangaroo court, as they say. Kangaroos, I don't know why it's associated with kangaroos, but anyway. They basically knew what they wanted their outcome to be. They just wanted to go through the formality, didn't they? I don't know why they just didn't kill him. Why waste the time of bringing in witnesses and stuff like that? But anyways, they wanted to find something so they could, peg him with it, and then they could kill him or send him off to be killed. But they found none. Mark tells us they found none. Okay, well, why did Jesus die? If they weren't finding anything, even though they want to, they're in charge. I mean, they've got control of the witnesses and the evidence, one might say. They're the prosecutors and the judge. Jesus has no defendant. I mean, I should say defendant. He has no defender. He has no lawyer there defending him. So, what is Mark telling? Well, remember, Mark, is a Christian. He's telling the story. Of course, Jesus They couldn't find nothing on Jesus from his perspective. They couldn't find anything on Jesus. So even though they had many witnesses, notice said many, not just a few or some, he's specific. There were many witnesses against Jesus. Wonder why? Wonder why? Would you have come out against Jesus? Would you have given testimony? Yeah. Why? Well, why would you do it? Under what circumstances? You don't know? All right. Do we have to assume that all of these witnesses were liars? They must have all been bad people, right? Mr. Tedeschi, they're all lying against Jesus. You don't have to assume that, no? They might be mistaken. I thought Jesus said this, or Jesus said this, but they garbled it, or they misunderstood it. But apparently, people heard Jesus say things they didn't like. Many posts. Truth Social. You don't want to leave a paper trail, remember. But unfortunately, the internet never forgets. You can delete and expunge all you want, unless you buy one of those companies, those online companies that will expunge all your stuff. Nevertheless, Jesus had left a paper trail, but they were false witnesses, Mark tells us. Their testimony did not agree. Okay, so they couldn't get their story straight. Okay, basically, as your translation says, this control. And then finally, now this is interesting. Mark says, some took the stand, got up and said falsely, all right, Mark, he's already telling us how we're supposed to do their testimony. All right, they're lying. That Jesus said, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another not made with it. So there's the attack on the temple. Okay, that's the problem. Now, the question is, because Mark's quoting this, where does Jesus say this? Where did Jesus make this assertion? In the Gospel of Mark. Surely, Mr. Palumbo, Mark must have recorded it. No, Ms. Lacey? No? You don't think so, or do you know? You know it's... I'm setting you up. I mean, it comes up in Jesus' trial. But it must be, we have 3 other Gospels, right? Mr. Tedeschi, we've got Matthew, we've got Luke, we've got John. It must be there, right? Jesus apparently taught this. Someone heard him say it. Where is it? Well, it's nowhere. So I guess you could say, well, yeah, but so Jesus didn't say it, right? This Mark is right. They're false. They're making something up, making up this charge, right? They have to do something. Problem is that Jesus did say. Yes. Some of them do, yeah. Some of them are copying Mark's stories and they basically repeat and they use Mark's language, but a lot of times they edit it with their own points of view. Yeah. It's basically the same story. So, for example, if we go to, where is it here? Remember Dr. Dunn? Yes, chapter 2 of the Gospel of John. I'll read it. Chapter 2, verse 13. Since the Passover of the Jews was near, so that tells us it was springtime in Israel when Jesus did this, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. As he should, as any good Jew. It's a pilgrimage festival. You're supposed to travel to the temple in Jerusalem, perhaps. So he went up. So he was observant. He found in the temple something he didn't like. He found in the temple area those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, birds, as well as money changers seated there, other businessmen. He made a whip out of cords and drove them all out of the temple area. He whipped them out of the temple. That's how angry apparently he was. He got violent. Jesus got violent with that. And he whipped the animals out as well, the sheep and the oxen. And he spilled the coins. He overturned their tables with their money on it. And to those who sold doves, he said, "Take these out of here. And stop making my Father's house a marketplace." Now his disciples recalled the words of Scripture, "Zeal for your house will consume me." If you look at the reference in your NAV, you can see where it's quoting from. It's I. So it's here, Psalm 69. So this is John. He's saying, we as his disciples, we connected this with a prophecy, or at least a scripture, that zeal for your house will consume me. At this the Jews answered Jesus and said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Another way of saying, what's your authority for doing this? Coming into the temple and disturbing things, making trouble. Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews said, "But this temple's been under construction for 46 years. Actually, what they mean is renovation. The temple had been there for a few centuries, but our old friend King Herod had started renovating it while he was alive, and it was still going on when Jesus was alive. So 46 years, and you're going to raise it up in 3 days? But Jesus was speaking about the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his body was rebuilt, in a manner of speaking, the temple of his body. His disciples remembered that he had said this, and they came to believe the scripture and the word Jesus had spoken. So John, this Christian text confirms for us that Jesus did actually say this in Franco Zamora, right? Destroy the temple and I'll rebuild it. Then how can Mark say that they were false? How can he say that they falsely testified if they say exactly almost what Jesus did say? Even so, but that's not good enough. The high priest rises and he questions Jesus. Don't you want to say anything? Okay, there was really no right to silence back then, but, anyways. What are these men saying against you? Don't you have anything to say? But Jesus didn't say anything. So finally, the high priest, who's the head of the Sanhedrin, puts Jesus under oath. Well, he puts him under oath. Let's say in the Matthew's gospel, he makes it specific that he puts Jesus under oath. But he asks him directly, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? See, they wouldn't say God because they would respect the name of God. So they would try to avoid saying God. So he's the Blessed One. So it's essentially the same thing as saying, are you the Son of God? Which is just a weird thing. What does the high priest mean by this? Does he just mean a political figure? We'll talk about that when we talk about Jesus as Messiah. And this Jesus will answer. He simply says, yes, I am, which can mean yes, but it's also the name of God. I am. It's the name that God uses when he reveals himself to Moses in the beginning of the Bible, in the book of Exodus. Moses wants to know God's name and says, I am who I am, which is actually kind of a way of avoiding the question. It's basically God saying, it's none of your business. But nevertheless, that became the official name for God. Always, I am. That's his name, I am. And Jesus uses that as his answer. And you will see the Son of Man, and he's probably referring to himself. Some scholars try to say, no, the Son of Man is somebody else Jesus is talking about. I don't know who it could be. If Jesus is claiming to be the Christ, is there someone coming beyond the Christ who's a Son of Man? It doesn't seem to make any sense to me. But you see, he seems to be talking about himself. You'll see me seated at the right hand of the power. Okay, even Jesus does not say God either, but that's what he's saying, at the right hand of God, which he calls the power, and coming with the clouds of heaven. And this is, as we'll find out later, this Son of Man reference is a reference to this figure who's sent from God, who's also kind of like God in a way. It's a semi-divine figure that appears in the book of Daniel in the Jewish Bible. And so that's apparently why the high priest has the reaction that he does. Saying you're the Messiah, I'm the King of England. All right, fine, but that doesn't make me a blasphemer. I haven't necessarily insulted God by saying, oh yeah, I'm the King of the Jews. Yeah, I'm the legitimate king. You should all follow me, get down on your knee and honor me and, put a crown on my head. It doesn't necessarily mean a disrespect to God necessarily. But something in what Jesus says is how the high priest interprets it, because you can see from his reaction, he tears his clothing. He rips his shirt, which for Jews is a traditional sign of great mourning or great anger. So whatever Jesus says made him very angry. However you want to understand it. But he calls it a blasphemy. So now you don't need any witnesses at all. I mean, for Jewish law, you needed at least 2 witnesses. But what more witnesses do we need? Because you heard this guy say in front of all of you, this blasphemy. And like, yes, we did. So he has to die. Again, in the story, Paul doesn't actually tell us what the blasphemy is. He gives us the words of Jesus, and we kind of have to think it through. Who is this guy calling himself the Son of Man, saying he sits next to God, and that God is sending him with power on the clouds of heaven, the clouds of the supernatural world, which is just it's a mythological language, the clouds of heaven. It means the glory of God. Who is this guy saying this? And the reaction of the high priest So that's as close as we get to an answer of why Jesus had to die. He was claiming things about himself that were bringing him pretty close to God. Control over the temple, that he could destroy it, that he was the Messiah, God's Son. He was the Son of God. And then some other things pop up. For example, in the Gospel of John, Jesus raises this man Lazarus from the dead, which is just weird because, I don't know, Jesus raises other people from the dead. I don't know why that freaks out the religious leaders so much. Maybe they start thinking that Jesus is getting too much power, maybe, is what's going on there. And then, of course, the claim that he's the Messiah. Now, you might want Jesus dead because, you thought, well, if the Romans hear about this, they'll destroy us. They'll wipe us out. So we got to get rid of this guy. So that might be a reason to kill Jesus. But just the idea of being the Messiah really wasn't. We know from historical records that there were other men around the time of Jesus, both before him and after him, that also popped up in Palestine from time to time and claimed to be the Messiah, or that the Messiah was coming and they were going to throw out the Romans and reestablish the kingdom of Israel. So, I mean, there was, it was, Jesus, again, was not unique in this, although Jesus wasn't going around saying those things. He wasn't saying, I'm the Messiah, I'm going to reestablish the kingdom, I'm going to throw out the Romans. So there's nothing blasphemous necessarily about it. There's something religious that Jesus said. If you read between the lines, I think basically I'm saying, I'm divine in some way. I'm not just the Messiah. I'm God's Son. The emphasis on God's Son, not Messiah. All right. I'll leave it there and see you next week. Yeah, we'll talk about the Messiah. All right. Oh, I put this on the PowerPoint. Huh.